Okay, good afternoon or good morning for some of you. I am Jennifer Dean Durning. I am a doctoral student working under Dr. Jenny Yost at Villanova University, which is in Pennsylvania in the US. I will be presenting this study on behalf of our team listed here. This study grew out of an initiative of the EBR's 4-year EU-funded cost action from 2018 to 2022, with over 35 countries participating as a global research and development network, promoting collaboration and capacity building for evidence-based research. This slide helps to show how this work group is situated within the greater EBR's network. Specifically, the study that we conducted was developed in the Implications for Ethics Committees working group, whose remit is to raise awareness and acceptance of the importance of evidence-based research among ethics committees and ethics committee members as relevant stakeholders. So in terms of background, the ethics review process, as the working group understands, does not currently require researchers to produce any systematic summary of the existing evidence that relates to their research questions. It has been argued that new research should not be considered ethical unless the study is fundamentally rooted in current scientific knowledge, and that the research question cannot be answered with the existing evidence. This can lead to waste if research efforts are duplicated, first in terms of research resources themselves, but also in terms of the time and goodwill that are invested by research participants. It's possible that a proportionate approach is needed for the scientific justification of research to the research ethics committees. For example, a systematic review and meta-analysis may be appropriate to substantiate a large clinical trial, but that degree of time-consuming and expensive evidence synthesis may not be equally appropriate for other types of research designs, such as a secondary analysis of data. The working group has been asking questions about just what evidence ethics committees need to expect or what they should request from the researchers who submit ethics applications in order to substantiate the ethical merit of their research proposals. The guidance appears needed because there's evidence that ethics committee members may currently be evaluating the scientific rationale for proposed studies in these applications based on individual preferences. As identified on this slide, the committee recognizes that there are many factors that influence ethics committees' decisions for ethical approval of research studies. Within the EBR's Implications for Ethics Committees working group, it was identified that the role of the risk inherent to different study designs may be helpful for understanding the type and the extent of evidence needed to justify a study scientifically, and it could potentially inform guidance about what type of evidence syntheses should be expected, depending on the research design and its associated risk during the ethics review process. The working group highlighted risk because of the ability to quantify it, because the risk of harm or even of death to participants may represent the most serious of all the factors that influence the ethics of a study, and because risk is most closely associated with the need for scientific justification. The more ethically problematic study requires better evidence in order to justify it. And the consideration of study design is one way to identify what constitutes an ethically problematic study. From our investigation into how risk impacts ethics reviews, we hope to generate a typology of research designs that would be driven by the degree of risk. This could be used to develop guidance for ethics committees regarding the scientific justification that should accompany an ethics application for a given study. And as you see here, this was a description of risk that the working group generated and provided to the research participants. So the study, the sampling involved convenience and snowball sampling to target researchers, research ethics committee members, and individuals with an interest in research ethics. The implications for ethics committee's working group members were asked to send out an email invitation to participate in the survey to relevant individuals, creating our convenience sample. Within the invitation email, individuals were asked to forward the invitation on to anyone whom they thought represented other relevant individuals. And we used contacts from members of the implications for ethics committee's working group. And using those, email requests were sent to a variety of contacts and networks in the UK and in Australia as well. This survey was developed by the implications for ethics committee's working group members. First, it included several demographic questions. Then participants were asked to rate the risk that they considered characteristic of 31 given research study designs, which included various types of questionnaires, interviews, focus groups, behavioral interventions, and clinical trials. The list of study designs was developed by the members of the working group based on the experience of the studies that had come to the ethics committees that they'd sat on. We appreciate that such lists may always be incomplete, but we felt that the 31 types of studies covered the vast majority of research and research proposals. Likert scales were used for participants to rank their perception of the riskiness of each type of research methodology, using a scale between 1, which represented not at all risky, to 10, extremely risky. Average scores were then used to create the risk rankings. Finally, there was one open-ended question that invited participants to provide additional comments about the survey and about the concept of risk. We received 283 completed surveys. It may come as little surprise based on the context and the outreach that I just outlined that the regions represented by the majority of respondents. First was the UK, second was Australia and New Zealand, and third, participants from the EU. Other regions from which we got participants included 0.7% of our population from Central or South America, 3.5% of our population from non-EU European countries, and 1.1% from the US and Canada. We had no participants from Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. 51% of participants stated that their job description explicitly included conducting research. And here are some of the results we got. The rankings shown in this chart, for example, phase 1 being the highest risk, phase 2 being second highest risk, and so on. These were based on mean scores for each design for all participants. The color coding is meant to be illustrative. Statistical comparison of ranking by role and by geographic area demonstrated consistent and shared views in the ranking. First, we compared all participants versus the various roles. We had given them a choice of selecting that they were a REC member and a researcher versus being a REC member only versus being a researcher only versus neither of those roles. Secondly, we compared all participants versus specific different geographic areas. We had enough participants to do this for Australia, New Zealand, Central South America, the EU, other European countries, UK, and the US and Canada. So we had no participants to consider statistical comparison of the other regions. We did do a Kendall's Tau test to compare the rankings and noted that it showed statistically significant correlations ranging between 0.41 and 0.95, again, indicating a good consistency of these rankings. And to note, the use of the word intrusive was used to mean research exploring significant factors that affected the participant or their families or communities' health, well-being, and security, such as financial security, physical security, etc. As mentioned previously, there was one free text box to obtain additional comments from participants. We received 90 comments. A number of participants critiqued the structure of our study and the survey questions themselves. And my colleagues tell me that we should expect nothing less from ethics committee members. We received many other interesting quotations that we are analyzing further for inclusion in our subsequent paper. At the first pass, nothing that came in this qualitative data appeared to contradict any of our quantitative findings. The primary conclusion that we reached from these findings is that ethics reviewers do perceive a link between the research design and the level of risk to participants. The data that we could obtain regarding risk across different research designs fairly well corroborate the continuum of risk that the research team had hypothesized. Now that we have generated this evidence, the next steps are to consider in what way or what ways should the riskiness of the proposed research impact the ethics application process. We think that yes, it should. Our intention now is to produce a single sheet information guide translated into multiple languages that could promote the use of this typology by ethics committees, and then eventually to conduct follow-up research about how the guidance was used and whether ethics committee members indeed found it helpful. I think we'd like to ask some questions such as, should the type or extent of evidence needed to scientifically justify research for an ethics committee differ based on riskiness? It's the general question. Is an evidence synthesis necessary to support every research design? Is one of the more specific questions. When an evidence synthesis is deemed as warranted, what type of synthesis should be used or what degree of rigor should be required? Can and or should we provide guidance that for the highest risk studies, a systematic review and meta-analysis are necessary to justify the science that supports this research? And these are some issues we'd like to discuss with you all. And if you have other questions, please share them with us. That concludes the presentation, and we look forward to your questions and comments. Thank you.